Chapter 16 The Wail of the Quilletti. There had been a moment that day at the beach before Leo saw death rain down from miles away, when he saw it up close, right at his feet. It was a thing he'd never told anyone about, a secret, because compared to everything else that happened that day, it seemed insignificant. And yet Leo kept coming back to it afterward, the image haunting him almost as much as the smoke-filled sky. He had wandered off on his own looking for that shell, the one he promised to bring back. He would know it when he saw it. Pearlescent and perfectly round, no chips or holes, a mixture of pinks and blues and lavenders. The size didn't matter. It could be as small as a locket or as big as a sand dollar, so long as it was beautiful. Because if he thought so, she would think so too. He was so focused on finding that shell that he almost stepped on it. The jellyfish inches from his toes, the gelatinous body splayed across the wet dark sand, looking like a blister on the beach, its tentacles shriveled underneath it. Such an alien thing, Leo thought, even more alien looking than the actual aliens that had come to Earth from millions of light years away. They at least had arms and ears and eyeballs. Leo couldn't tell if the jelly was still alive or not. He was too afraid to touch it, afraid that it would sting him, even dead. But what if it wasn't? Was there a chance he could save it? If he could get it back in the water, would it suddenly blob back to life and float away? Had it come onto the shore to die, or was that just a mistake, the work of an indifferent tide? Did jellyfish have a time, the way that humans supposedly did? It was just her time, or was that too just a lie people told themselves? For a second, Leo considered walking away, pretending he hadn't seen anything at all. But then he heard his father's voice in his head. We have a choice, Leo. Each and every day gives us an opportunity to do something, to leave our mark, to make things better, so that when we fall asleep at night, we can do it knowing that our day made a difference for someone else, no matter how slight. We owe that to each other, don't you think? Leo knew he didn't just mean the Fenders, or humans in general, or even the inhabitants of Earth. He meant every living thing. We owe it to the universe to help each other, or at least to try. Scattered among the shells and the seaweed and the tiny scuttling crabs, Leo found a stick, and with it he carefully dug between the quivering blob, afraid of hurting it, and yet growing more and more certain that no longer felt anything, that his effort was a waste. Even as he dragged its body out to sea, letting the retreating waves bear it back with them. For a moment, Leo watched the jellyfish blob at the surface, slowly working its way back to shore with the current. He was afraid of what would happen if he stayed, that the creature would simply wash right back onto the sand to rot. Only if he stopped watching could he entertain the possibility, the hope, that it was still alive. That what he had done mattered. He glanced across the blue-black expanse, feathered with white caps crashing, and far off in the distance the thimble of the Ikari excavation tower anchored to the earth. Then he turned and ran back to his father and his brother, his quest for the perfect shell temporarily forgotten, toes pressed into the sand, a similar sinking in his stomach, a sense of powerlessness in the face of forces so much greater than him. It was 2:35 on a Saturday afternoon, and the Jarek warships had just come out of jump, missiles armed and ready. All personnel evacuate immediately. The alarms continued to sound as Leo trailed Baz through the corridor, back in the direction they'd come, getting farther and farther from the man that they had to rescue, leaving Leo's father behind. Leo had waited at the door for a moment, heartbroken, head swamped with doubt, seeing his father, the man that he'd come to save, standing next to two robed Jarek only feet away. An insignificant amount of space, easily crossed with a few strides, not like the light years traveled to get here. And in that moment, Leo felt an overwhelming urge to run back into the room, back into his father's arms, holding on no matter what. But then his fingers brushed along the edge of the data chip nestled in his pocket, the one that had been handed to him in secret. Do this for me, Leo. It could mean the world. He thought of Gareth. Definitely still alive. Out there, somewhere. And he saw the Grimacon cat's face, knowing that every second he spent standing in the doorway, deciding on what path to take, was one last second the crew of the Icarus had to escape. So much seemed to hang in the balance. But then Chalice grabbed Dr. Fender by his shirt, pulling him through the door on the opposite side of the room, away from Leo. He caught one last glance at his father, caught the silent between the desperate go on his lips. So he turned his back on his family and threw with the band of pirates. Pirates who were now running for their lives again. That way, Leo pointed a turn ahead. You sure? I'm sort of sure. Except he wasn't. His brain was all static and swirl. He couldn't recall all the turns they had took to get here. How had he gotten here? Not just here, but here. Allied with a pirate crew, trapped in a Jarek base, under attack force that, less than a day ago, Leo would have run to for protection. If the Ikari really did what his father said, then they were just as responsible for what happened to the ones pressing the button, weren't they? Which is worse, doing the unthinkable, or standing back and letting the unthinkable happen so you could use it to your advantage. And if Leo was no longer on the Coalition's side, then whose side was he on? Skits, are you there? Answer me for Earth's sake. Kat's annoyed voice brought Leo back into focus. She's still not responding. We'll find them, Baz said. All personnel must evacuate immediately, the mechanical voice droned above them. All personnel must The warning shut off in a burst of static. That can't be good, Kat quipped. From other corridors, Leo could hear the blasts of gunfire. The Ikari were inside the base, the allies of humanity. 5 hours ago, Leo would have been on his knees grateful to see the Ikarian soldiers. He would have shown them to the patch that he still had in his pocket, the one planet so much bigger than the rest, encircling the smaller ones, like bees swarming a hive with its queen bee at the center. This place is a war zone, Baz, Kat said. And look at us, right in the middle, like always. You voted to come here, he reminded her. Leo, any idea how far we are from the hangar? Leo spun around, trying to get his bearings. None of these doors locked or looked familiar, or they all did. We're close, I think, Leo said uncertainly. Left here, maybe. Then they made a left and nearly walked straight into a firefight, the hallway exploding with deadly energy, the silver Ikarian forces pitched against the black armored Jarek. Maybe not, Baz said, pushing everyone back. They took a different turn instead. Kat still calling out for Skits, Leo still armed with his inhaler, which he'd definitely taken a hit of, trying to stave off the attack that seemed all but certain. They made it 10 more feet before the 2 Ikarian soldiers appeared in the corridor, blocking their way. Their tall, elongated frames, clad in plates of silver armor covering most of their hairless, pale blue skin, their eyes shone a fiery orange. Their rifles were raised, spindly fingers on the triggers. Don't shoot, Baz said, dropping his own weapon to his side and raising his other hand in surrender. Please, we're human. We're with you guys. The gangly-limbed Ikari didn't fire. They also didn't lower their weapons. Sometimes what you don't do matters even more than what you do, and in this moment, Leo saw them differently. Rather, he saw himself through their eyes, and what he saw wasn't a human being. It was a resource, just like Baz had said. A means to an end. Man, are we glad to see you, Baz continued. The Scalies were going to execute us. Seriously, if you hadn't come along... As Baz continued to try to talk his way past them, one of the Ikari soldiers removed a scanning device from its belt, a bright blue beam projecting outwards, tracing Baz from scalp to heel. The soldier held the scanner up to his partner. Leo guessed the results weren't good by the way that they both retrained their rifles on the captain, taking their burning orange eyes off Kat for an instant, which Leo knew was all she needed. 2 blasts, one right after another, and the 2 Ikari guards fell, incapacitated. Before Leo could even process what had happened, Baz was already dragging him down a different corridor, cursing and muttering to himself. Come out to the coast. We'll get together and have a few laughs. He pulled both Leo and Kat to a stop. Hold up, do you hear that? Hear what? All Leo could hear was the alarms. That's music, Baz said. Leo concentrated. He could hear something, awfully faint but steadily growing in volume, harmonizing voices over crunchy guitar chords. Definitely music, and distinctively human. I gotta get out of here. I'm stuck inside this rut that I fell into by mistake. Kat and Baz looked at each other and smiled. Skits. They followed the sound down the hall of the labyrinthine hallways until it was enough to drown out the alarms and explosions, the electric guitar slashing through the thunder of war. Leo turned the corner to a wild sight. Boo, his robe torn and singed, 3 hands gripping a hunk of metal that might once have been a door of some kind, but now served as a shield, feet straddling Skits' treads, as if he were sitting on the front of a miniature tank barreling down the corridor. Leo had to admit, he was happy to see them. The robot speakers were blasting a full volume, but switched off the instant she spotted Baz. Finally, she moaned. I swear, it's not like we've been looking all over for you or anything. Found you first, Kat said. She inspected the new burns in Boo's robe. You okay? Nothing that will leave a scar. Boo said, dropping his makeshift shield. Sorry about the plan. They caught us before we could even make it to the terminal. Guess we weren't as stealthy as we thought. Not your fault, Baz said. It was a terrible plan. Boo looked at Leo. Your dad? Leo wasn't sure what to say, how to explain why his father wasn't with them. He didn't really have an answer himself, just a whisper, a promise, and a data chip. All the rest was questions and doubts. Dr. Fender is getting a ride with someone else, Baz said for him. The kid's coming with us. I'll try to explain once we get somewhere where nobody's shooting at us. That could be a while, Kat said. Either of you have any idea how to get back to the Icarus? Baz asked. Because I can't remember where we parked. Why didn't he think of this sooner? Leo glanced at his watch, the gift from his parents on his 8th birthday. Cutting-edge technology, holographic projector, health monitoring system, database enabled. It could tell time. Plus, it automatically remembered where you parked your car, or he supposed your ship. Leo pressed a button on the side, pulling up the app. A minuscule red dot began pulsing on the screen, along with the number indicating how close they were. 180 meters. This way, he said. They darted down the 2 more corridors, with Leo now at the lead, avoiding the sound of gunfire at all costs, and finally making it to the door that opened up to the hangar. There sat the Icarus, less than a football field away. The freighter it had docked beside, already gone, escaped with the cargo before the attack, or perhaps confiscated by the Ikari when they arrived. The ship looked like it was still in one piece. Unfortunately, it was surrounded by Ikari's soldiers. Never easy, is it? Baz said, breathless. Not with you around, Kat admitted. The captain turned to Boo, whose fur stood on end. I think we're going to need you to wail on these guys, if you're up for it. That's another terrible idea, Boo replied. You know what it will do to you. Yeah, but it will do the same to them. Do you think you can carry Kat, the kid too? Coletti shrugged. Manageable. What about you? Baz knocked softly on the side of the robot. Skits has got me. Don't you, Skits? The robot extended one of her claws to rest on the captain's shoulder. Always, she said. Leo had no idea what was going on. What are you talking about? What do you mean? What it will do to us? What is it? In your time on Earth, did you ever hear the Irish legend about the Banshee? Baz asked. Leo shook his head. He'd heard his father use the phrase screaming like banshees before. It always just meant he and Gareth were being too loud while he was trying to work. You're going to want to plug your ears for as long as you can, Kat said, slinging her stolen Jarek rifle over her shoulder, unless you feel like having your head explode. Wait, what? Leo watched as Kat stuck a fleshy finger in one ear and a metal one in the other. Baz stood on the front of Skits' treads, back pressed against her torso. 2 of her extendable arms locked around his waist. Boo, what's going on? In answer, the Coletti wrapped 2 arms around Leo, much the same as he had when they were snuggled together back on the Icarus. Kat's right. Plug your ears as tight as you can, and don't worry, I won't drop you, he said before sweeping Leo off his feet. In Irish folklore, the Banshee's wail was a harbinger of death. Her keening could drive one to madness or despair. Boo's wail wasn't too far off. Leo pressed both hands against his ears, but it was like trying to cover Boo with a blanket. The sound emanating from the Coletti's mouth could not be completely buffered or blocked out. It seeped through Leo's fingers, through bone and skin, reverberating straight to his brain, where it drove home a spike, a blinding shaft of pain that caused nearly every muscle in Leo's body to seize. He was paralyzed. At least that's how it seemed. His arms and legs were unresponsive, though he could still turn his head to see Kat, her own eyes shut, fingers still jammed in her ear, riding on Boo's opposite hip. He was strong enough to carry them both, even with one of his arms wounded. Out of the corner of his eye, Leo saw the captain lashed to Skits, clutching both sides of his head and gritting his teeth through the pain as she barreled ahead, unfazed. Whatever Boo was doing, whatever head-splitting sound was coming out of his mouth, it had no effect on robots. The agony on Baz's face was nothing compared to the look on the Coletti himself, though the anguish in his roar reflecting also in his eyes. This sound came from somewhere deep inside him, some shattered place, a wound that had never healed, and it broke Leo's heart even as it blasted his brain. The sound echoed across the hangar, rolling like a wave, striking the Ikari soldiers, standing guard over the ship. The moment Boo's wailing reached them, they dropped their weapons, collapsing to the spindling knees. Some, like Leo, seemed paralyzed. Others trembled, heads cupped in their hands, adding their own screams to the mix. Boo's yell had rendered them immobile. he had practically frozen time. He could only wail for so long, however, long enough to make it halfway to the ship, and in the moment that followed, Boo's wail faded to nothing, and everything that had slowed down suddenly sped back up. The Ikari that had been driven to their knees shook their heads and staggered to their feet. Those who had been paralyzed by the sound found their wits and scrambled for their dropped rifles. But they weren't the only ones who had recovered. His mouth shut, Boo's arms opened, two of them anyway, and Kat dropped free, unslinging her own weapon and firing in the direction of the soldiers beside the ramp, causing them to scatter. Boo refused to let go of Leo, though, just like he promised, running full speed and plowing through one of the Ikari, who was still reeling from the roar, sending it flying. They hit the ramp, and Leo finally felt his feet hit the ground, Boo collapsing beside him. Bursts of deadly energy filled the hangar. Skit zoomed up the ramp next, her tread smoking again, and Kat followed, taking errant shots at the Ikari soldiers behind her without even looking. And then there was Baz, bringing up the rear this time, making sure every crew member of his was on board. He was less than a meter away when an energy bolt hit him, causing him to stumble toward the ramp. Leo reached out with one hand, Boo with the other, pulling the captain on board. "Kat, get this thing moving," the captain shouted, holding the side of his head with one hand so that Leo barely got a look at the wound as he staggered past. "Kat? I know, we're going, she shouted back. The ramp was barely closed before the Icarus launched sideways and then up, knocking Leo into the wall as he followed Baz into the cockpit. The captain still clutching his head, he could hear Kat's voice, exasperated, shouting all the way down the corridor from the pilot's seat. Just once. You might take a girl somewhere quiet, somewhere peaceful, somewhere where there aren't bounty hunters or security bots or a whole platoon of Ikari soldiers all trying to gun her down." Leo lurched forward and then stumbled backward as the Icarus turned and then burst out of the hangar, a parting barrage of laser blasts from the soldiers attempting in vain to stop it. "Somewhere with a lake," Kat continued to rant as she steered the Icarus up and away from the base. "And some trees, real ones, Baz, not artificial, and a freaking duck. Is that really too much to ask? To see some stupid freaking ducks again before I die?" The ship tore through the gray clouds, leaving the Jarek base behind, pulling free of the planet's grip and breaking back into the empty black void of space. Except the void wasn't empty. It was filled with ships. Ikari naval cruisers and frigates attempting to ensnare the Jarek freighters and transports fleeing the planet, swarms of fighters from both sides weaving through the constant barrage. The whole view from the cockpit exploded with arcs of energy and bright bursts of flame. Leo stared. Here at last was the war, the one that had been raging long before Leo was even born, the one his father had tried to shield him from, happening right in front of him. Leo wondered if his father was on one of those arrow-like Jarek transports emerging from the planet's atmosphere alongside the Icarus, desperate to make their escape. As he watched one of those freighters slip through the wall of an incoming Ikari laser fire and jump safely away. That one, Leo thought. Let's just assume he was on that one. He had no idea where his father was going, where Shellis was taking him. He wasn't even sure why. I have to see this through. Leo only knew that whatever it was, it had to be important, even more important than staying with your own son. A sudden jolt caused Leo to stumble, almost slamming his head as Kat banked hard, attempting to put as much distance as possible between the Icarus and the slowly advancing Ikari blockade, which fortunately seemed more interested in fleeing Jarek ships than the lone pirate transport. We've got an incoming message here," Kat said, punching a button as the holovid lit up above the ship's console. Leo looked to see a brain floating in a glass tube. "Hello, Baz," Mac's recorded voice said. "I hope this reaches you in time. If you are still planning on rescuing Dr. Fender, I suggest you do it quickly. It seems my impetuous partner found another party interested in the same information we gave you, and they are willing to pay a princely sum. If I had to guess, I'd venture that said other party is already on their way. I realize it's a bit underhanded, but you of all people know what it takes to survive out here. So, if you do make it out alive, please try not to take it personally." The transmission ended, and Mac's image vanished, leaving Kat with dagger eyes and bared teeth. "They sold us out," she snarled. "Those double-crossing Herflax humpers sold us out. I swear when I see those two again, they're going to need glass jars for every part of their bodies. And I mean every part." "Maybe we should concentrate on the more immediate problems," Boo suggested, pointing to the array of familiar red lights blaring on the console. Leo recognized the warnings by now. Incoming starfighter lockings on their ship. Leo couldn't tell if they were Jark or Ikari, and at this point he wasn't sure it even mattered. There was no warning shots this time. The fighters came in from all sides. The Icarus staggered under the volley of hits, its shield barely absorbing the damage, their pursuers closing in for the kill. Why, when you're on nobody's side, are you suddenly everybody's enemy? We're taking a beating here, Kat said. I don't care where we jump to, but we better do it now. I know, Baz fired back. The Icarus shook again, and another alarm blared. Behind Leo, a column of steam hissed out of a pipe. I'm serious, I know. A new set of lights started to flash, warning the ship's shields were almost depleted. Baz, just 2 more seconds. Leo felt the familiar cold hand grip his throat. He struggled for a breath. He thought of the jellyfish floating in the waves, the one he'd tried to save. Now? Now! 2 fists slammed down on the console at once. In the engine compartment of the Icarus, inside the insulated FTL drive designed by the brightest Ikari engineers, an electrical spark triggered the release of a very precious substance known to the galaxy as EL-486. The element instantly fused with 4 of the much less precious substances, creating a chain reaction that Leo, despite his father's teaching and many diagrams and drawings, couldn't even begin to follow. The power it released was immense, but also highly channeled, so that instead of blowing the Icarus to smithereens, it served to activate the FTL drive system, creating a minor tear in the fabric of the universe and launching the ship and its 5 passengers into hyperspace. It was a beautiful piece of tech, a godly marvel, perfected over centuries of space travel, the kind of technology that allowed you to explore the unknown, to expand the boundaries of your empire, to cement your place as the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Its only failing, and it was a small one, was its dependence on something that could only be found on 1 planet out of 1,000, and even then, the means of mass extraction often resulted in the planet's slow decline, disrupting its ecosystems, polluting its rivers, its oceans, its skies, sapping the life out of it, and eventually, inevitably, those who once called the planet home. There were some who called this progress. There were others who disagreed. The rest were caught somewhere in between.